Okay, let's look at pattern 18, consulting and abiding by willingness. And I'll read its heart, the little description, and then talk about some interesting things, some of which are applied by the description, and some of them are new, interesting angles. Consulting and abiding by willingness. Coercion drains life from living systems for narrow, short-term results. Readiness to contribute is a precious, vulnerable, but ever renewable resource for wisdom and action. So ask about, respect, protect, and evoke willingness. And as we make and respond to requests and suggestions, notice how willingness evolves, interactively shaping how we choose, act, speak, agree, disagree, let go, and persist. So the essence of willingness, as I see it, is aligning the life energy of the entity that is about to be willing with an activity or situation that it is considering or is being presented to them. People are often willing to do things because they believe in them, or because they have a relationship with the person or group that is, the other people that are involved. And because it's involved with relationship, it has a dance, willingness and unwillingness, and consent, which is another pattern, dances with partnership and command, with power with and power over kinds of dynamics. And so I began to be interested, because consent and willingness and well-utilized life energy and exuberance, these are all patterns in the pattern language. And I noticed they all have to do with life energy. And it's like consent has a go along with, good enough for now kind of quality to it. I'll put my life energy into this because it's okay. Willingness has a desire and a readiness, let's go. Well-utilized life energy sort of covers all motivations and all. It's more generic, and exuberance, of course, is passionate. I want this, I love this. So that sort of places in the context of how life energy is manifested here in the pattern language. And I began exploring, as I thought about this, ways to increase willingness, like where does willingness come from, what stimulates it? And this can be both ourselves or others who want to. If you want to get people to be willing to do something, what do? Which can be done on a straightforward way, it can be done in a manipulative way, but again, what's going on with the dynamics of willingness? And I came up with 3 things, one of which is you matter, the other is this matters, whatever the thing is that they're being invited to consider or get involved in, and that your contribution matters. And you matter is brought to life by listening to people, by having them feel heard. That kind of inquiry, as discussed in the feeling heard card, opens people up, dissolves resistance, creates relationship between the listener and the person being heard. And related to that is respect, pureness, partnership, a sense of we're not dealing with power over, we're not going to mess with you, dominate you, whatever. You're one of us, we're with you. There's an inclusive, welcoming, holding hands, shoulder to shoulder, whatever. There's an energy of we're in this together. And caring and support is another piece of that. So something happens with you, we're there for you. They'll be there for me, turning it around the other way. I sense I'm part of a larger whole where I can make a difference. And then make a difference with what? What is this thing that I'm willing myself to be part of. And it can be purpose, values, need, a narrative or story we're all part of. And that's all the things that are associated with life energy, which are in the well-utilized life energy card. And it can be mine, like what's my life purpose? What needs do I have? What story am I living out in myself or in the larger world? And then there's the story of anyone who is bringing to me something to participate in, something to do, or think about, or whatever. Am I willing? It's like, and if they, and that's very often the advertisers say, sell your story. You're not selling a product or a service. You're selling a story, something that people can step into, participate in, and meaningfully and play a role. And that's so fundamental to who we are as a human being. If you can sell the story where they matter within the story because it matters, whatever they're doing, it will matter because, and inviting them to share that story. So it can be either promoting, like, what do you want to do? Well, you can do that here. Or here's our project. Do you really want to be part of it? Look at what it's going to do. So all that's the this matters life energy part. And your contribution matters. It's like, okay, so do you have any thoughts about how we should go about doing this? Do you have any feedback? Are there things you'd really like to do in this context? And you have aptitudes or skills or passions that you'd like to contribute to this? Or if you tell us them, we can pick something in that would fit for you. You want to join the Army, you want to do computers? Okay, join the Army and do computers, whatever. And at any time, I mean, if we're maintaining willingness, if somebody has concerns, objections, sense of trade-offs, or something's not being considered here, to take that seriously. Your contribution matters. So if you think we should paint it red instead of purple, okay, let's hear about that. We're taking it seriously. And if you're going to need some kind of training, skills, capacity building of some kind, individually or collectively, to be part of this, we'll provide it to you. So your contribution matters. Your contribution matters so much that we will invest in you, not just listen to you, but invest in you to participate. So these three things, the you matter, the listening, respect, caring, the this matters. This is a big, fancy project. It's a really powerful story you can be part of, and your contribution matters. You've got a role to play here, and we're going to engage with you around that role. All of these constitute consulting and abiding by willingness and supporting willingness coming up. We are evoking, in fact, willingness by doing these things and maintaining it. I mentioned at the beginning, you could do this manipulatively. We can present a narrative to share that aligns people's values and needs in ways that make them more willing to do what I want to do. I can, if I'm the advertiser or the populist, dictator, I can, the whole patriotism thing. Here's a narrative. You can be part of it. You are part of it. Anybody who isn't as bad, now, and there's lots of people who buy into the patriotism narrative, and they want to do it. They want to go and die for their country. And it's like, this is a manipulative, you can say it's good or bad, depending on how it's used, how you believe in what's going on. But there's ways to tap into what's really important to people and shape it. You can also listen to them in ways that dissolve their personal boundaries and increase their emotional dependence on you, which is a lot of, cult activity or whatever. You're going to be very friendly in order to make them part of you so that they They are one with the group. It's not a co-created consensus. It's a seductive consensus. You have been seduced into becoming involved, and they may feel like they're having an important impact. Oh, this is really. You look around the voting. How much impact does your vote actually have? Particularly when you look at you are presented with options. You don't get a chance to co-create them. You are presented with options that you're supposed to pick between, and how much impact does that really have, and to what extent can those options be manipulated to benefit somebody in some way? So you feel like you're having an important impact, even though you're not. A lot of ideological battles have that quality. So again, this is not consulting and abiding by willingness is a neutral thing in that you can use it for good or ill, but it is being aware of it and using it in a principled way is definitely part of what's going on with building a wise democracy. And you go, who would apply consulting and abiding by willingness? Obviously, leaders, groups and organizations, relationships. To what extent does your lover, your parent, your child consult and abide by your willingness? To what extent do you consult and abide by their willingness? When you're raising your child, how much is oriented to, are they willing to do this? And what are you willing to do? And it's talk and nonviolent communication has lots of stuff about how to raise a kid that way, how to be a parent that way. And of course, there's lots of stuff in consent, so close to consent. Are people willing to have sex? Are they willing to be touched? Are they willing to? There's the sexual dynamics are in here also. And of course, if you want to get lots of people into a public engagement activity, which is a big part of what the wise democracy is, how do you get participation in collective decision-making, collective reflection, collective learning that would make a democracy wise? You need to be able to do these things. You need to address people's willingness in ways that are fair. And the whole culture, my friend Mickey Kashtan, who is a international leader in nonviolent communication, actually wrote a series, a half dozen stories, imagining what a culture would look like if it was organized by willingness rather than coercion. And the stories are really, it's not just utopian. They're real situations in the stories. And each one shows how would people go about taking each other seriously in ways that arrange for what needs to happen through the willingness of everybody involved. And of course ourselves too. It's like when something happens or we're presented with an opportunity or challenge, to be in touch with our own willingness. Consulting and abiding by willingness is our own, not just others. Am I willing to do what I'm being asked to do? And if I am being taken seriously or not, this is where it gets to the last part of the pattern. How, when people are asking something else or suggesting something to us, how does our willingness evolve in interaction with what they do and how we respond to what they do? A lot of the things that I just described in terms of you matter, this matters, your contribution matters, all that is something to keep in mind while you're doing that, to notice, if I choose to do this and act, if I choose to speak up or not, if I'm, choose to agree, disagree, persist, let go. There's willingness dancing in all of that, and to just pay attention to the signs, to our emotional state, to our bodily state, when we are being drawn into something, drawn into a vortex that we don't like, and to abide by our own unwillingness to step back, say no. The whole say no movement is, as opposed to the just do it movement. I mean, the whole say yes, say no, all these things are boundary issues, whatever, a lot about willingness and being in touch with your own soul, spirit, whatever. And there's integrity in doing. There's a sense of integrity is an interesting word. It's an integer. It's like a oneness. It's like I am whole. I am together. I am, you know. And the more you operate from that deep place of using willingness as a test, honoring your own sense of willingness, where your life energy draws you, where your life energy says, wait a minute, be cautious, all this. And other people, a social system or culture can be built around disrespect of that. It can oppress people. It can create a scene where there's conformity. People are just following orders. And people are wanting to be, people including yourself, want to be safe or liked or admired. And that all undermines, a funny way, integrity is bound up in the consulting and abiding by willingness, both from a personal perspective and from the group and social and cultural fields you're embedded in. And there's willingness, a reputation for willingness gets you invited into more collaborations. People think, oh, here's somebody you can work with. It also potentially can give you a reputation for being abused. So having a reputation for willingness in certain realms and for boundaries and unwillingness in other realms, like how to modify or present who you are in the world to other people, to groups, to society generally. Reputation can be, big chunk of reputation can be structured around the ecosystem of willingness that you have established and presented to the world. And the last really important thing or two things I want to say, one of which is willingness is an alternative to force. If people are willing to go along, you don't have to pressure them or bring in external energies, pay them all the extrinsic motivations as opposed to intrinsic motivations. Willingness has to do with intrinsic motivations. And the more everything can be based on willingness, the less energy you have to bring in from the outside. And that is a form of efficiency that should be recognized and honored and go, oh, the power over approach, the forcing, you have to put in energy to push, you have to put in energy to deal with resistance. And to what extent can we let go and invite willingness? And the more people's willingness is stretched and demanded, the less likely a culture of willingness will evolve. To the extent people are respected and consulted and their life energy is evoked and worked with, the more they'll be willing to stretch in certain circumstances. And so there's a whole dance of willingness, and it grows. It is not just a renewable resource, but a cultivatable resource. The more we help bring willingness to life in and around us, the more all the entities around us, the people, nature, groups, will be willing to do things they might not otherwise be willing to do if they're always being pushed around. And I, just as I was talking, realized how much this relates to our relationship to nature. To what extent are we noticing what plants and animals can and will do and want to do naturally? To what extent do systems, ecosystems and natural cycles, the way they do things naturally is what they're willing to do. And the more we force them to do things that they're not naturally made to do, the more resistance we're going to get, the more degradation we're going to get, the more energy we're going to have to input into the system to keep it going. So in the process of doing this talk, I just realized how ecological the applications of this can be. Anyway, there's much to explore endlessly, but I'm going to stop it at this point. Enjoy your use and exploration of the pattern. Bye-bye.